Back to Programming with a Purpose. This is the lesson 5 in the beginner series in which we are trying to learn iOS development using Swift. So in this lesson we are going to learn about closures. So closures are basically a group of code that executes together. So how it's different from a function is basically function has a header and it can be called again and again, but for closure we have to rewrite the body or assign it to a variable, and that variable can then be passed on to other functions. So basically nested functions are also closures because they have a certain body that is limited in scope and defined inside another function, as well as the global part of the code is also a closure. So here I am creating an array of strings with names Chris, Alex, Eva, Barry and Daniel. So here I am printing the names in reverse order. So I am going to do it using functions as well as using closures. So I'm commenting out this line for now. Let's write the function to reverse the strings. So here I'm passing two strings s1 and s2. And what we are going to basically return a bool value, which means that we are going to return to if s1 is greater than s2. Otherwise it is going to return false. So here I will be sorting these names by this function reverse. So this is how a function can be used that can be passed to as a parameter to another function and perform the relevant operation. So here I am printing the names, and as you can see that they are sorted in descending order according to the first character, as the first character is unique in our case. Now what we are doing is basically we are writing inline closures where we are passing the actual closure inside this by parameter. So I am copying the definition of the reverse function here, and after that I am going to write the keyword in, and then we are going to return the value that we have returned inside the function reverse. So this is inline closure. It is more compact, more neat, and basically more you can understand it better. So here I'm writing another closure which will basically implicitly return instead of using the actual return keyword. So you can see that in the parentheses we are passing s1 and s2 in, where s1 is greater than s2. So it will also give you the same result. So this is basically implicit return in closures. Another shorthand form to write a closure is basically using the argument, which is basically $0 and 1 in our case. So we just need to pass $0 is greater than $1. So this will perform the same action or the same closure that we have written in the previous 2 or 3 times. So this is how shorthand arguments work for string. There is another way of writing this closure in even a more compact form. Depending upon, this is restricted to the type because strings allow this operation. So you can basically just use a greater than sign without any parameters, and it is going to sort it in descending order. So this is the shortest form of doing the reverse on a string array. So now we are talking about the trailing closure. Trailing closure is basically a closure that is passed to another function, and the round brackets are closed, so it goes as a parameter, but when you write it you will see that it does not seems like a parameter. It is basically passed in parentheses. You can even remove the round brackets as well if there are no parameters, but it is basically the last parameter that is provided to a function, and it is used to perform whatever functionality that closure has inside its body. So you can see that this is also another form of a closure which is presented as a trailing closure. So the next I am going to show you how map function works inside an array in Swift. So map will do the exact thing that a closure will do with each of the element inside an array. So here we have an array of ints. I haven't mentioned the type of array here. So this is basically going to get the type using type inference. Now I am creating another variable with remainders. It will contain 5 elements just like the array of numbers. Numbers.map is a keyword, and after that we are going to write a closure. That closure contains a parameter and input as a number, but the type is not mentioned, and a return type of int. After a keyword in is basically placed here, and you can see that it is returning the number mod 10. So basically it is giving us the remainder of each of the entry, and then we are going to print it. So it has printed all of the remainders when it is divided by 10. So this is how map function or map closure works inside an array in Swift. So after that, there is another interesting thing is basically closure has the ability to capture values from surroundings, from the scope in which it is written. So it means that this is the case where I'm writing a nesting function to show you how it is capturing the values. So you can see that inside the nested function, nothing is passed. Like the incrementer function has no input, but it is manipulating the variable of total and the variable that is passed into the function make increment and are updating it and then returning a value. So it means that it can capture the values that are presented to its scope. So this is how our incrementer function or a closure will work. So now I'm printing the value. Make increment, I'm calling it for value 10. And when I'm going to print f, it means that the function is printed since it is returning a function. Now if I call it with a rounded brackets, it is going to print the value. And if I'm going to call it again, you will see that the 10 is not again printed, but the value is now 20. This leads us to a conclusion that the closures are reference types. It means that it retains the value. So if you pass the value to different variables, the value will not be reset but will be passed off the previous time the closure is executed. So this is an important conclusion. After that, we are going to discuss escaping closure. It is a very important keyword that you will see in a lot of functions during API calls at the rate of escaping and at the rate of non-escaping attached with a parameter inside a function call. So I am going to discuss it here. So here you will see that I have copied this function from a link that I've mentioned in the description box. There is a URL and then there is a data. So here the data is, I have assigned it to contents of a URL, but you can also set it to nil. I'm going to set it to nil as you can see on line number 144 here. After that, the function load data is called, which has a keyword as escaping, and escaping is basically the data that is provided. So we have used some dispatch queue to make the asynchronous calls to certain functions. And after that, load data is called with this variable type data, and a guard statement is presented to handle if there is any nil value. So you can see that when you run it, data loaded is printed first, and after that the number of bytes is printed. It means that the data still exists even after the function call is done, because we will reach data loaded after we have called the function load data. So that means the a at the rate of escaping keyword is working. So if I am going to remove it, I have to basically make some changes inside the code. So here I am commenting some of the lines, and now the parameter will become non-escaping by default. And as you can see that the calls become synchronous. So it is going to print the number of bytes inside a data first, and after that it is going to print the string data loaded. So it means that we have got the data before we are going to print this statement. So the major difference between escaping and non-escaping closures is basically escaping closure outlives the function in which it is basically called. But non-escaping basically gets killed when we go out of the scope of the function. So escaping is the necessary requirement for using an asynchronous call, usually in APIs or when we are loading a web link where we need to load data asynchronously. We will be using at the rate of escaping keyword for the closure that are being passed to that function as an escaping closure. By default, all of the closures are non-escaping. So now I'm going to show you what auto closures are. Auto closure is basically a simple closure that is passed with a specific keyword auto closure, and it is basically used where there is a certain condition that needs to be met for the calling of the closure. So this closure is not evaluated until it's called. So it is good to improve the performance of the system overall. So the closures are only evaluated when required. This is all for closures in Swift. Next we are going to move to classes, structures and enumerations. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it already, and stay tuned. Thanks for watching.